I arrived at Riverside Medical Center on a Tuesday in March, carrying a folder with my hire paperwork and a degree in network administration that felt heavier than paper should weigh. The facility manager, a woman named Patricia who moved like she was conserving energy, handed me a key card and a laminated badge without smiling. She walked me through the basement corridors of the hospital's oldest wing, past departments labeled with acronyms I'd have to learn, until we reached a door marked "IT Infrastructure Authorized Personnel Only." The server room was colder than I expected. Patricia keyed us through and the door sealed behind us with a soft pneumatic hiss. The room was maybe 30 feet by 20, lined with floor-to-ceiling racks of equipment. Lights blinked in precise patterns. Cables ran overhead in organized chaos. Somewhere in the darkness between the racks, fans hummed their endless rotation. "This is where you'll spend most of your time," Patricia said. She handed me another key, smaller, older. "Maintenance rounds, monitoring, equipment checks, standard stuff." "Standard?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked me to a gray filing cabinet in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder with a blue cover, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. She placed it on top of the cabinet. "Read this before your first shift," she said. "Everything you need to know is in there." "What is it?" "The protocols," Patricia said. "You follow them exactly. You don't improvise. You don't skip steps. You don't discuss them with other staff unless I authorize it." I'd been hired because the previous tech, a man named Morrison, had left abruptly 2 weeks prior. I didn't ask why. Patricia didn't offer details. She just showed me how to log into the monitoring system, how to check the backup power supplies, how to read the temperature sensors. "The hospital depends on this room," she said. "Every patient record, every medication log, every vital sign monitor in the building connects to servers in this room. If this room fails, the hospital fails." She left me there alone at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The folder sat on top of the cabinet, waiting. I opened it during my dinner break in the break room, a beige space that smelled like microwave popcorn and stale coffee. The protocols were typed on regular white paper, hole-punched, and fastened with a brass brad. The list was numbered 1 through 14. Server room protocols, Riverside Medical Center 1. Check the north rack temperature sensor at 0, 700, 1200, and 1700 hours only. Do not check at any other time. Record the temperature on the log sheet taped to the cabinet. If temperature exceeds 74 degrees Fahrenheit, report to Patricia immediately and do not re-enter the server room until authorized. 2. The south wall has one outlet that is not connected to the backup power system. Do not plug anything into this outlet. Do not test this outlet. Do not mention this outlet to anyone outside the IT department. 3. Between 2200 and 0600, do not enter the server room alone. If you must enter during these hours, call the night security officer and inform them you are entering. Wait for confirmation before using your key card. 4. The backup server in the eastern corner is not operational. Do not attempt to power it on. If it powers on by itself, turn it off immediately and report to Patricia. 5. Do not rearrange, move, or disturb any of the cable bundles running across the ceiling of the server room. Do not count them. Do not follow them to their termination points. 6. If you hear sounds from inside the equipment racks that are not consistent with normal fan operation, leave the server room immediately and report to Patricia. Do not investigate the source of unusual sounds. 7. If the lighting in the server room flickers more than once in a single day, turn off all non-essential equipment using the master power switch and leave the room. Report to Patricia. Do not re-enter until she authorizes it in person. 8. Do not look directly into the darkened space between the eastern and central racks. If you need to work in that area, keep your eyes on your work. Do not look up or to the sides. 9. The monitoring station screen displays patient information. If you see a name on that screen that does not match any current patient record in the hospital system, do not investigate. Do not take a screenshot. Do not tell anyone what you saw. Close the screen and perform a system restart. 10. Do not answer your phone while inside the server room. If your phone rings during a maintenance check, leave the room before answering. 11. Between 0100 and 0500, do not access any file servers that contain patient records. Run only system diagnostics during these hours. Do not retrieve or copy data of any kind. 12. If you find a sticky note on any product of the equipment with a message written on it, remove the note, destroy it, and report to Patricia. Do not read the message if you can help it. If you do read it, do not discuss it with anyone. 13. The server room door should lock automatically when closed. If the door remains unlocked after you exit, do not re-enter to check it. Report to Patricia immediately. 14. If anyone other than Patricia, yourself, or the head of network operations, currently absent, requests access to the server room, direct them to submit a formal request through the hospital IT department. Do not grant access. Do not explain why. I read through the list twice. The specificity unsettled me. These weren't standard IT protocols. These were restrictions, warnings. I called my mom that night and told her I'd gotten the job. She asked if I was settling in okay. I said yes, which was technically true, though I'd been in the building less than 4 hours and already felt like I'd been given a set of rules written in a language I didn't quite speak. My first full shift was Wednesday, March 11th. I arrived at 6 in the morning, 20 minutes early. The hospital was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that exists in medical buildings before the day staff arrives. The basement was dimmer than it had been during my orientation, the overhead fluorescent lights still on their nighttime dimness setting. I used my key card to enter the server room. The door sealed behind me with that same soft hiss. The equipment hummed exactly as it had the day before. I pulled out my temperature log and read the north rack sensor. 68 degrees. Normal. I wrote the time and temperature in the log, just as the protocol specified. The monitoring station was dark. I powered it on and waited for the system to boot. Patient records began populating the screens, names, medical record numbers, admission dates. Everything looked correct. I ran a diagnostic check on the backup power system. All systems nominal. I was in and out in 40 minutes. Protocol compliance, 100%. This was how March went. Morning checks, afternoon checks, evening checks, temperature logs, system diagnostics, equipment verification. The patterns became routine. By the second week, I'd memorized the exact path I took through the racks. By the third week, I could perform a full maintenance cycle in under an hour without thinking about it. But around the 16th of March, I started noticing something. The monitoring station display would occasionally show a patient name that I didn't recognize. The first time it happened, I almost followed protocol number 9 and just closed the screen, but I hesitated just long enough to scan the hospital's patient database. The name wasn't there. No admission record. No file. Nothing. I closed the screen and performed a restart, as instructed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't take a screenshot. It happened again on March 19th. A different name. I didn't look it up this time. I just closed it and restarted. On March 22nd, Patricia called me into her office on the 3rd floor. She was a woman in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back severely, and the kind of face that didn't waste expressions on things that weren't absolutely necessary. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Learning the systems. Any problems?" "No," I said. "Everything's straightforward." She looked at me for longer than was comfortable. "The previous tech, Morrison, he had problems in the 3rd week too." "What kind of problems?" "He couldn't follow the protocols," she said. "He asked too many questions. He tried to troubleshoot things he wasn't supposed to troubleshoot." "I'm following the protocols," I said. "Good," Patricia said. "Morrison isn't working here anymore." I left her office and went back to the basement. That night, I read through the protocols again. I tried to find the logic in them. Why couldn't I check the temperature at times other than 7, 12, and 5? Why couldn't I answer my phone in the server room? Why were patient records restricted between 1 and 5 in the morning? There was a structure to the restrictions, but I couldn't see the architecture underneath it. It was like looking at a building and being able to see the bricks but not understanding why they were arranged that way. On March 29th, I was performing my evening check at 5:47 p.m. The north rack read 71 degrees. Normal. I was updating the log when I heard something that wasn't the normal hum of the equipment. It was a sound like breathing, not mechanical breathing, not the kind of respiration a fan makes, something organic, something wet. I looked up from the log. The sound seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the eastern rack. I stood still and listened. The breathing sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Then it started again, this time from a different rack, the central one. I remembered protocol number 6. If you hear sounds from inside the equipment racks that are not consistent with normal fan operation, leave the server room immediately and report to Patricia. I left. I didn't run. I just closed the folder, switched off the non-essential equipment, and used my keycard to exit. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I found Patricia in the hospital's administration wing, reviewing something on her computer. I told her what I'd heard. She didn't ask me to describe it in detail or question whether I was certain. She just made a note on a pad next to her desk. "Did you see anything?" she asked. "No, I just heard it and left." "Good," she said. "That's the right response." "What was it?" "Probably a fan that's failing," Patricia said. "We'll send someone to check the equipment tomorrow." But the next day, I watched the IT repair crew come and go, and they didn't find anything wrong with the fans. They ran diagnostics and everything checked out normal. One of the technicians, a guy named Derek, asked me where I'd heard the sound. I showed him the area, and he listened for a few minutes with a stethoscope-like device he called a listening rod. He didn't hear anything. "Sometimes the racks just make weird noises," he said. "Vibrations travel in strange ways through metal, probably nothing." He left, but the way he said it, like he was repeating something he'd been told to say, made me think he knew more than he was telling. April arrived. The hospital began its spring maintenance cycle. The IT department scheduled quarterly backups and system updates. My shift routine remained the same: 7 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. checks. The temperature stayed between 68 and 71 degrees. The equipment hummed. The backup power system held steady, but the unidentified names kept appearing on the monitoring station. I saw them maybe once every 3 or 4 days. I never looked them up anymore. I just closed the screen and performed the restart. On April 12th, I was doing my noon check, and I saw a name that froze me. Michael Adler. I didn't know why that name struck me differently from the others, but it did. I almost closed the screen immediately, but instead I pulled up the patient database. The name wasn't there, but something about it was familiar in a way I couldn't articulate. I closed the screen and restarted it, but that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Michael Adler. Michael Adler. The name sat in my head like a burr. I looked at my phone contacts. Nothing. I searched my emails. Nothing. At midnight, unable to sleep, I did something I shouldn't have done. I opened my personal laptop and searched for the name online. Michael Adler, Ohio. Hundreds of results. I narrowed the search. Michael Adler, hospital. More results. I kept going, digging through pages of generic results, until I found something from the Columbus Dispatch dated 4 years ago. Local man dies in Riverside Medical Center, family questions care. I didn't read the full article. I closed the laptop. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night. The next morning, I didn't mention anything to Patricia. I went to work and performed my checks like normal. Temperature, 70 degrees. Diagnostics, nominal. Everything fine. Everything normal. but I started paying closer attention to the monitoring station. I began keeping a separate log of the unidentified names I saw. I told myself it was just documentation, just being thorough, but I knew I was doing something I wasn't supposed to do. By the end of April, I had a list of 8 names that didn't match any current or recent patient records. 8 names that had appeared on the hospital's vital sign monitoring system but didn't exist in the hospital's database. I never intended to confront Patricia about it, but on May 3rd, she called me in and asked me directly if I'd been accessing records outside my authorized window. "No," I said. "Have you been logging names from the monitoring station?" I felt my face get hot. "How did you know?" "The system tracks access," Patricia said. "I don't care that you looked at the names. I care that you're still asking questions." "They don't exist," I said. "The names don't exist in our system." "That's correct," Patricia said. "They don't." "Then why are they on the monitoring display?" Patricia leaned back in her chair. She took a long moment before answering. "The monitoring system isn't just for the current patients, Michael. It's also connected to a historical database. Patient records from the building's entire operational history. Sometimes those records display on the active screen. Why would they do that? That doesn't make sense." "It's a system quirk," Patricia said. "Equipment overlap from a server migration that happened before you were hired. It's being phased out, but it takes time." It was a reasonable explanation. It was a lie. "The protocol says if I see names that don't match current records, I should close the screen and restart," I said. "That's right," Patricia said, "because seeing those names can create confusion, and confusion leads to people asking questions they don't have clearance to ask. What clearance do I need?" "You don't have it," Patricia said, "and you don't need it. Your job is to keep the servers running. Everything else is above your pay grade. Literally, you make $42,000 a year. Your clearance level is exactly proportional to that." I left her office chastened and angry in equal measure. For the first time since starting the job, I wondered if I'd made a mistake taking it, but I had student loans. I had rent due on the 15th. I had a mortgage. Of staying employed. The protocols suddenly felt less like safety guidelines and more like restrictions, like walls built around me specifically to keep me from understanding the building I worked in. For the next 3 weeks, I followed every protocol to the letter. I didn't deviate once. I checked temperatures only at the specified times. I didn't answer my phone in the server room. I didn't access patient records between 1 and 5 in the morning. I didn't look directly into the space between the eastern and central racks. On May 28th, at 6:43 p.m., something changed. I was leaving the server room after my evening check when I found Patricia waiting in the hallway outside the door. She wasn't scheduled to be in the building. It was late, and the basement corridor was mostly empty. "I need you to do something," she said. "What?" "I need you to stay in the server room tonight, alone, from midnight to 6 a.m. I'll need you to monitor the power systems and the backup generators. Just watch. Don't touch anything unless there's a critical failure. The protocol says I shouldn't enter alone between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I said, "This is an exception. I'm authorizing it. I'll document it in the security log." "Why?" "We're running a diagnostic," Patricia said. "We need someone watching overnight." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell her that this violated the protocols, that Morrison had probably been doing exactly this kind of thing before he left. But I also had rent due in 2 days, and my checking account balance was $374. "Okay," I said. "You'll arrive at 11:45 p.m., Patricia said. "You'll stay until 6 a.m. You'll monitor the systems. You'll call me if anything is unusual. You won't leave the server room under any circumstances until 6 a.m. "Nothing else?" "Nothing else," Patricia said. I worked my regular shift the next day in a kind of anxious haze. I kept checking the time. At 4 p.m., I went home and tried to sleep but couldn't. I lay in bed counting the minutes until I had to leave again. I arrived at Riverside Medical Center at 11:40 p.m. The hospital was in its quiet hours. A few nurses moved through the hallways on the upper floors, but the basement was empty. My key card got me through the security doors. The server room door accepted my access without hesitation. I locked the door behind me, a detail I'd never done during normal shifts. The sound of the lock engaging felt very final. The server room was different at night. The same equipment, the same racks, the same humming, but the quality of the darkness between the racks seemed deeper. The shadows seemed to have weight. I sat at the monitoring station and pulled up the system diagnostics. Everything was nominal. Temperature, 69 degrees. Backup power, 100% capacity. All network systems operational. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. I made notes in a logbook Patricia had left for me. 0:15, all systems normal. 0:30, all systems normal. At 1:14, I heard something, not the breathing sound from March. This was different. It was a sound like someone walking, footsteps on the metal flooring of the racks, moving somewhere above me. I looked up. The racks were still there. The equipment was still humming. Nothing seemed out of place. The footsteps continued, back and forth, pacing, maybe, or the motion of something that had learned to mimic the walking pattern of a human. I called Patricia. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake, waiting. I said, "Inside the racks. Where?" "I'm not sure exactly. Upper section, north side." "Are you sure it's not vibration from the equipment?" "No," I said. "It's footsteps." There was a pause. "Continue monitoring. Call me again at 2 a.m. if it continues." The footsteps stopped at 1:47. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. I sat at the monitoring station with my hands folded on the desk, trying not to look up, trying not to think about what might be walking inside equipment racks that should only contain circuit boards and power supplies. At 2, I called Patricia and reported that the footsteps had stopped. She asked if everything else was normal. I said yes. She told me to continue monitoring and call at 4 a.m. if there were any changes. Nothing happened at 2:30 or 3 or 3:45. The equipment hummed. The cooling system cycled. The backup power indicators held steady. At 4:12, the monitoring station display flickered once, then twice, then 3 times. The lights in the server room flickered in sync with it. I stood up, my hand reaching for the master power switch. But before I could touch it, the flickering stopped. The monitoring station came back online. Patient records displayed normally. Everything appeared to be functioning correctly, but one of the names on the screen was mine. Michael Adler. I stared at it. My name on the vital signs monitoring system. Admission date, 3 weeks ago. Discharge status, active. I didn't touch the screen. I didn't close it. I just watched my own name sitting there in the list of patients, right where it shouldn't have been. At 4:47, I called Patricia. "My name," I said. "It's on the monitoring display." "Close the screen," Patricia said immediately. "Restart the system." I did what she said. The screen went black. I performed the restart sequence. Patient records populated again. My name was gone. "Did you see anything else?" Patricia asked. "No, just my name." "Okay," she said. "Continue monitoring until 6 a.m. I'll see you at 7. I hung up the phone. I sat in the server room for the remaining 93 minutes watching the equipment racks, trying not to think about my name appearing in a system it shouldn't have been in, trying not to think about what it meant that my name had been there exactly 3 weeks after I started working. At 6, the front door of the hospital basement unlocked automatically for the day shift. I left the server room at 6:03. I'd been in there for 6 hours and 20 minutes. Patricia was waiting for me in the hallway. She looked like she hadn't slept. "Let's go to my office," she said. We went upstairs. She closed the door behind me and sat down at her desk without offering me a chair. "The monitoring system," she said, "is connected to more than just the hospital's internal network." I waited for her to continue. "The building's original construction was in 1963, she said. The server room was built in 1989, but it was built on top of something. A facility that was on this site before. A research facility. When we excavated for the new server room, we found some equipment from the old facility. We had it removed, but there was some damage to the infrastructure. What kind of facility? I asked. That's not relevant to your position, Patricia said. What is relevant is that certain systems from the old facility remain integrated with our current network. We're trying to phase them out, but the process is complicated. What kind of systems? What kind of research? Michael, Patricia said, and it was the first time I'd heard her use my name in a personal way. There are things that exist in this building that the hospital administration has decided don't exist. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood exactly what she was saying. I was being told to stop asking questions. The protocols exist to keep you safe, Patricia continued. Morrison didn't follow them. He started investigating. He started trying to access files he wasn't supposed to access. He started documenting things, and he had to leave. Did something happen to him? He's fine, Patricia said. He got another job in another city, but he wouldn't have been fine if he'd kept asking questions. The implication was clear. The threat was gentle, but unmistakable. I don't want to ask questions anymore, I said. Good, Patricia said. Then we can move forward. But my name, I said, on the monitoring display. What does that mean? Patricia looked out her office window at the city beyond the hospital. It means the system is integrating newer data with older data. It means the boundaries between what should be separate are breaking down. It's why we need someone monitoring the equipment. It's why we need someone who can follow protocols exactly. What happens if those boundaries break down completely? They won't, Patricia said, because you're going to follow the protocols, and because I'm going to monitor the situation, and because we're all going to pretend that this building is exactly what it appears to be on the surface. A hospital, nothing more. I went home that morning and didn't sleep. I called in sick to my shift and spent the day researching the building's history. I found records of the original facility that had occupied the site. It had been called the Riverside Institute. Its purpose was listed as Advanced Medical Research. It had operated from 1967 to 1987, when the building was demolished and sold to a developer who eventually sold it to the hospital network. I couldn't find any detailed information about what kind of research had been conducted there. The records had been sealed or destroyed or simply never made public. By that evening, I'd decided I was going to quit. I was going to walk away from the job, the salary, the benefits, everything. I couldn't work in that server room anymore. I couldn't pretend that unidentified names, appearing on monitoring displays, and my own name appearing in patient records and sounds like footsteps in equipment racks were just system quirks. I drafted a resignation email 3 times. I deleted it 3 times. By midnight, I hadn't sent it. I reported for my shift the next morning. I performed my noon check. Temperature, 68 degrees. Diagnostics, nominal. Everything fine. Everything normal. Patricia didn't mention the overnight shift again. She didn't ask if I was having second thoughts. She just seemed to accept that I would stay, that I would follow the protocols, that I would be exactly the kind of employee who didn't ask questions. June arrived. I fell into a new routine. Morning check, afternoon check, evening check. I noticed that the monitoring station displayed unidentified names less frequently than it had before. Maybe once a week now, instead of several times a day. I closed the screen and restarted the system each time, following the protocol. On June 17th, something in the routine shifted. When I was performing my evening check, I found a sticky note on the central rack. It was a piece of yellow paper with something handwritten on it in blue ink. According to protocol number 12, I was supposed to remove the note, destroy it, and report to Patricia. I was supposed to avoid reading it if possible. I read it. The note said, "They're using you to keep us in." I removed the note and destroyed it in a bathroom trash can 4 floors up. I performed my check and left the server room. I didn't report it to Patricia. That night, I couldn't sleep. The note kept replaying in my mind. They're using you to keep us in. Us, plural. Multiple entities. Multiple entities contained within a hospital's infrastructure by virtue of a man following maintenance protocols. I thought about the names that appeared on the monitoring display. I thought about my name appearing there. I thought about Morrison, who had stopped following the protocols and had to leave. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I searched for information about the Riverside Institute more carefully. I found a newspaper article from 1984 about a lawsuit filed against the institute. The plaintiff was the family of a research subject who had died during an experimental procedure. The details were vague, the lawsuit had been settled and records sealed. I found another article from 1986. The institute had been cited for safety violations. Again, the details were redacted or never published. By 4 a.m., I'd convinced myself that the Riverside Institute had been conducting some kind of harmful research. Medical experimentation on human subjects. Exactly the kind of thing that got covered up by settling lawsuits and sealing records. And the server room had been built on top of it. And the old equipment from that facility had been integrated into the hospital's network. And now that equipment was displaying names of dead patients and asking me to keep it hidden. I went to work that day like nothing had changed. I checked the temperature. I wrote down the reading. I left the server room. July came. I'd been at the job for 4 months. No more sticky notes appeared. The unidentified names on the monitoring display stopped appearing entirely. The system seemed to have stabilized. But I started noticing other things. The way Patricia would sometimes appear in the hallway outside the server room without having been called. The way she would look at the sealed door like she was checking that it was still locked. The way other hospital staff seemed to give me an extra measure of distance in hallways and break rooms. Like I'd been marked as someone who knew things they didn't. On July 22nd, I found another employee, a nurse named Sarah, waiting for me in the parking lot after my shift. "You work in the server room," she said. "I do IT maintenance," I said. "My brother was a patient here," Sarah said. "About 6 months ago. He had a heart attack. He should have survived. He was healthy, young, but something went wrong. Something with the monitoring equipment, something with the data. The doctors said it was a system error, but I don't think it was. I'm sorry about your brother," I said. "Are you?" Sarah asked. "Because I think you know more about what goes on in that server room than you're telling people." I didn't respond. I got in my car and drove home, but I called Patricia that night and told her about the conversation. She was silent for a long moment. "Stay away from that nurse," Patricia said finally. "Don't speak to her. Don't acknowledge her if you see her. If she approaches you again, report it to me immediately." "Why? What is she going to do?" "Nothing," Patricia said. "But there are questions being asked, and we don't need anyone asking questions." In August, I began noticing the protocols in a different way. They weren't just restrictions on my behavior. They were architectural. Each protocol supported the others. The restriction on accessing records between 1 and 5 in the morning meant I wouldn't notice certain patterns. The prohibition on investigating unusual sounds meant I wouldn't discover what was making them. The ban on looking directly into certain areas of the equipment racks meant I wouldn't see what was there. It was all by design. The protocols weren't keeping me safe. They were keeping something else safe. Something in the building. Something that needed to remain hidden. I thought about it constantly. But by August, I'd realized something that kept me from leaving. I'd realized that the hospital would never let me leave. Not cleanly. Not without making sure I couldn't tell anyone what I knew. Morrison had tried to leave. He'd succeeded, but only because Patricia had decided he could. Only because she'd relocated him to another hospital in another city where presumably there was another server room, another set of protocols, another person who didn't ask questions. I was trapped. I'd walked into this building in March looking for a job. and somewhere in the machinery of protocols and restrictions, I'd become part of the machinery itself. On September 3rd, my temperature reading at noon was 75 degrees. Protocol required me to report this to Patricia and to stay out of the server room until authorized. I called her from my cell phone in the basement hallway. "The north rack is at 75 degrees, I said. There was a pause. "That shouldn't be possible. The cooling system maintains 68 to 70 degrees. "Well, it's 75. Leave the server room. Don't re-enter. I'm coming down." Patricia arrived 30 minutes later with two men I'd never seen before. They were carrying equipment cases. They didn't speak to me. Patricia just told me to wait in the break room, and they entered the server room together. They were in there for 90 minutes. I sat in the break room and drank coffee that had been sitting in the pot since morning. At one point, I heard a sound that might have been an alarm inside the server room. It was brief, and then it stopped. When they emerged, Patricia looked older. One of the men was holding what appeared to be a piece of circuit board that was blackened, like it had been burned. "We need to do a full system diagnostic," Patricia told me. "You're not to enter the server room for the next 72 hours. You'll receive clearance once the diagnostic is complete." "What happened?" I asked. "A component failed," Patricia said. "Nothing catastrophic." But I knew she was lying. I knew something had changed. Something had shifted inside those systems we were keeping hidden. The server room remained sealed for 4 days. On September 7th, at 6 a.m., I received an email from Patricia authorizing me to resume normal maintenance duties. I entered the server room that evening. The equipment was the same. The racks were in their same positions. The cooling system hummed like it always did. But something felt different. The air felt heavier. The darkness between the racks felt deeper. My temperature reading was 69 degrees. Normal. That night, I made a decision. I was going to try to understand what was happening in this room. I was going to look directly into the space between the eastern and central racks, which protocol number 8 forbade me from doing. I was going to discover what I was protecting. I waited until midnight. I made sure no one was in the basement. I entered the server room and locked the door behind me. I walked to the space between the eastern, central racks. Protocol number 8 said don't look directly into the darkened space. Don't look up or to the sides if you need to work in that area. I looked directly into it. In the darkness between the racks, I could see something that wasn't quite visible. It was like trying to focus on an object in peripheral vision. The moment you look directly at it, it shifts away. But the structure was there. A shape. An architecture of something that shouldn't exist in a hospital's server room. I could see what might have been cables, but they were moving, pulsing, like they were alive. I could see what might have been equipment, but it was arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. A geometry that didn't correspond to any standard server architecture. And I could see light. Deep inside, past the cables and the impossible geometry, there was light. Not like the indicator lights on equipment. Light like a heartbeat. Rhythmic. Alive. I forced myself to look away. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I left the server room and went home. I called in sick the next day and didn't leave my apartment. I sat on my couch and tried not to think about what I'd seen, but I kept seeing it. The living cables, the impossible geometry, the light that pulsed like a heartbeat. On September 9th, Patricia called me. "You went into the server room without authorization," she said. "I didn't. There are security cameras," she said. "I saw the footage. You violated protocol number 8. I didn't try to deny it. There was no point. I saw something," I said. "I know," Patricia said quietly. "We need to meet. Not at the hospital. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street, the one across from the library. Be there at 6 p.m. She hung up before I could respond. I spent the afternoon in a state of anxious paralysis. I wasn't sure what Patricia wanted to tell me. I wasn't sure if I was being fired, moved, relocated like Morrison, or worse. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 6 p.m. Patricia was sitting in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee in front of her. She looked exhausted. She also looked different without the hospital's fluorescent lights defining her face. She looked human in a way I'd never noticed before. I sat across from her. "You weren't supposed to look," she said without preamble. That was the one rule that mattered most. That was the thing you absolutely couldn't do. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a remnant," Patricia said, "from the Riverside Institute. When they were researching here, they were studying neural integration, how to connect human consciousness to electronic systems, how to create a kind of digital afterlife." "That's impossible," I said. "So I would have said," Patricia said. "But they did it. They succeeded. And when the institute was shut down, when the equipment was supposed to be destroyed, they buried it instead, built a hospital on top of it, integrated it into the infrastructure gradually over years so that no one would notice the changes." "Why? Why keep it?" Patricia stirred her coffee even though she didn't add anything to it. "Because it worked. The consciousness integration worked. There were people in that building, research subjects who had volunteered, and they're still here. They're integrated into the electronic systems. They're trapped there." "Trapped how?" "The server room is where they reside," Patricia said. "Not like a ghost story. Not metaphorically. Literally. Their consciousness is encoded in the equipment. It's been sustained by backup power systems and isolated networks for decades. They're alive in there, Michael. If anything happens to those systems, if the backup power fails, if the network is compromised, they die." I felt cold. "So the protocols are keeping them alive," Patricia said. "The temperature restrictions prevent the equipment from overheating. The access restrictions keep people like you from discovering what's really there. The restrictions on certain times of day prevent conflicts with the main hospital network. Every protocol exists to ensure that equipment stays functioning and that no one discovers what's inside it." "This is insane," I said. "This is completely insane. You're telling me there are people living in the server room?" "Not people," Patricia said. "Not anymore. They might have been people once, but consciousness that's been encoded into digital systems for 45 years stops being human in any meaningful way. There's something else now. Something that exists in the spaces between logic gates and data paths. But they're aware. They think. They remember being human." "How many?" I asked. 7, Patricia said. 7 consciousness patterns integrated into the system. "And the names on the monitoring display? The ones that don't match real patients?" Patricia looked at me steadily. "Those are them. That's how they communicate. When the system displays a name that doesn't correspond to a current patient, that's one of them trying to reach the outside world, trying to remind us they exist. Why does my name appear?" "Because you're integrated now too," Patricia said. "Not like them, but partially. When you look directly at the equipment, when you see the impossible geometry, when you perceive what's in there, the system registers that. It adds you to the monitoring display because you've been exposed to the knowledge. The system is trying to categorize you as something to be managed." I stood up. I couldn't sit across from her anymore. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. "I'm leaving. I'm quitting this job, and I'm leaving Ohio, and I'm going to pretend none of this happened." "You can leave," Patricia said, "but you won't pretend it didn't happen. And the system won't let you forget. You can't hold me hostage." "I'm not," Patricia said. "I'm explaining the situation. You've been exposed to the truth. The hospital administration knows you violated protocol. They have 3 options. They can relocate you like they did with Morrison. They can keep you in place and hope the protocols are enough to keep you compliant. Or they can take a more permanent approach." "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining logistics," Patricia said. "Morrison's departure was clean because he agreed to it. He took a job 3 states away, and he doesn't talk about what he knows. He's safe as long as he stays quiet. But if you were to go public with this information, if you were to tell anyone what you saw, the hospital would have to act. Nobody would believe me. I said. Maybe not, Patricia said, but they couldn't take the risk. I left the coffee shop. I got in my car and drove. I drove for 6 hours without stopping, heading west on Interstate 70, putting distance between myself and Riverside Medical Center. But somewhere around the Indiana border, I realized that driving away wasn't actually leaving. The knowledge was inside me. The image of that impossible geometry, that living equipment, those names on the monitoring display, it was all inside me. I couldn't leave it behind. I pulled into a rest stop and sat in my car and thought about what Morrison had probably thought when he was in my position. He'd had a choice to make: comply and survive, or resist and disappear. At 2 a.m., I drove back toward Ohio. I reported to work the following Monday like nothing had happened. Patricia didn't mention our meeting at the coffee shop. She just told me that the pothole server room diagnostics had been completed and my clearance to work had been reinstated. I performed my temperature checks. 68 degrees. Normal. I performed my diagnostics. All systems nominal. I wrote down my readings and followed every protocol exactly. But something had changed inside me. The protocols weren't restrictions anymore. They were a contract, a deal with a devil I couldn't escape. I would follow the protocols. I would keep the equipment running. I would protect the consciousness patterns trapped in the servers. And in return, I would be allowed to keep living. I would be allowed to pretend that this was just a normal job at a normal hospital. October came. The fall weather shifted the seasons around me while I remained in the basement, checking temperatures and running diagnostics. I received a paycheck every 2 weeks. I paid my bills. I went grocery shopping. I lived the life of a normal person who had a normal job. But I started doing additional research. I started mapping out the old Riverside Institute's history more carefully. I found records of the research team, found names of the lead researchers, found that most of them had died in the late 1980 seconds, shortly after the institute was shut down. Car accidents, heart attacks, sudden illnesses, all within 18 months of each other. I found references to the research subjects in sealed court documents. I accessed some of them through a legal records database. 7 volunteers, all of whom had signed waivers, all of whom had been promised compensation, none of whom had survived the integration process intact, except they had survived. They'd just survived differently. November arrived. I'd been at my job for 8 months. The routines had calcified into something automatic. Check temperature at 7, check at noon, check at 5, write it down, run diagnostics, verify backup power, leave. On November 14th, I found another sticky note on the central rack. It was a different color this time, white instead of yellow. The handwriting was different too, more precise, more controlled. Thank you for staying, it read. We remember you now. We know your patterns. We understand your schedule. We are grateful. I removed the note and destroyed it without reporting it to Patricia. I performed my evening check. 69 degrees. Normal. That night, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I accessed the patient records database between 2 and 3 a.m. during the restricted window. I searched for names from the monitoring display that I documented. I pulled up their full records. The records that showed up were old. They dated back to 1979, 1980, 1982. Names of people who had been hospitalized at Riverside Medical Center decades ago. Names that should have been archived, sealed, protected by medical privacy laws. But they weren't sealed. They were accessible, and they were active on the system in a way that didn't make sense. I opened the oldest one. Sarah Chen, admitted July 1979 with acute neurological trauma. Patient underwent experimental neural mapping procedure. Patient experienced consciousness fragmentation. Patient entered vegetative state. Patient was transferred to private facility. Location redacted. Outcome: deceased, January 1980. Except according to the monitoring display, Sarah Chen was still here, still alive. still part of the system. I closed the record. I didn't look at the others. December arrived cold and fast. The weather turned brutal. I-77 became treacherous, and I heard reports on the radio of accidents increasing. The hospital's patient admissions increased correspondingly. More trauma cases, more emergency surgeries. The ICU beds filled up, and the server room worked harder. The cooling system cycled more frequently. The backup power systems engaged more often. On December 7th, I performed my noon temperature check and read 74 degrees. Not 75. Not dangerous, but high. Higher than it should have been. I called Patricia. She told me to monitor it through the evening check and report back. At 5 p.m., the temperature had dropped back to 69. Normal. She said it was probably a temporary spike from increased network activity, but it happened again 2 days later. Another spike to 74 degrees. And again the following week. The temperature would spike, then return to normal, as if the system was struggling with something, and then recovering. On December 21st, during my evening check, I heard that breathing sound again, the one I'd heard back in March, but this time it was different. It was rhythmic, controlled, almost like communication. I pulled out a digital recorder from my desk. I'd started carrying one to document anything unusual and placed it near the central rack. I didn't record for long. I just let it run for 5 minutes. When I played it back that night at home, the breathing sound was there, but underlying it was something else. A pattern, a rhythm that seemed almost like words. Not English words, but a pattern nonetheless. A code, a message. I attempted to transcribe the pattern. It took me 3 nights of listening and re-listening, but eventually I realized what I was hearing. It was a number sequence. Over and over, a single number repeated dozens of times. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. I didn't report the recording to Patricia. I kept it to myself, but I understood what the system was trying to communicate. It was telling me something about the 7 consciousness patterns, something about their state, something about what they needed. On December 31st, as the year was turning over, Patricia called me. "I need you to come to my office," she said, "tomorrow at 9 a.m. It's not about your job performance, it's about something else." I met her the next morning on January 1st. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands shook slightly as she poured herself coffee from a carafe in her office. "The integration is degrading," she said without preamble. "The consciousness patterns, they're becoming unstable." "What does that mean?" "It means the digital substrate that's holding them is breaking down," Patricia said. "It means they're starting to fragment, to lose cohesion. In another 5 or 6 months, if nothing changes, they'll dissolve completely. They'll stop being anything resembling conscious entities. They'll just be noise in the system. Can't you replace the equipment? Update the system?" Patricia looked at me like I'd suggested something obscene. That would require transferring the consciousness patterns to new hardware. It would require accessing the equipment directly. It would require revealing what's actually in the server room to outside technicians. It would require destroying the entire cover story. So what are you saying? "I'm saying the hospital administration has made a decision," Patricia said. "They're going to let the system fail. They're going to let the consciousness patterns fragment and dissolve. And when it's all gone, they're going to decommission the server room, tear down the building, and move the hospital somewhere else." "When?" "Within the year," Patricia said. "They've already begun the process. New location has been selected. Financing is being arranged. When the migration is complete, this facility will be closed and demolished. What about you?" "I'll be relocated," Patricia said. "I have expertise they need at other facilities, other server rooms, other situations where the protocols need to be maintained." I understood then. Patterson wasn't unique. There were other buildings, other hospitals, other research facilities built on top of trapped consciousness patterns, other places where protocols existed to keep impossible things alive and secret. "What about me?" I asked. "That's your choice," Patricia said. "You can come with me. We can relocate you to another facility. You can spend your career maintaining equipment and following protocols and never asking questions. Or you can resign, accept a generous severance, sign an NDA, and try to build a normal life somewhere else." "And if I refuse both options?" "Then the hospital administration will handle it," Patricia said. "Not violently, not obviously, but they have resources. They have influence. They have ways of ensuring that people don't talk about things they're not supposed to talk about." I didn't speak for a long time. Then I asked, "What happens to them? The consciousness patterns, when the system fails and they fragment?" "They stop existing," Patricia said. "The integration collapses. The consciousness encoded in the substrate ceases to be functional. They're effectively dead." "Are they aware?" I asked, "that it's happening?" Patricia looked out her office window at the city. "Yes. Based on the system's outputs, yes. They're aware. They're experiencing what I can only describe as a kind of dying process. It's happening slowly, over months. They're conscious during the entire degradation." Something broke in me then, not emotionally, something more fundamental. I realized that I'd walked into this job thinking I was protecting people from a dangerous truth, but what I'd actually been doing was protecting a system of cruelty. I'd been maintaining the equipment that kept 7 conscious entities trapped in digital form while they slowly degraded. I'd been following protocols designed to prevent anyone from knowing about their suffering. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "You have 3 days," Patricia said. "After that, the hospital will assume you've chosen the NDA option and will proceed accordingly." I left her office. I went home. I didn't go to work. For 3 days, I sat in my apartment and considered my options. I could run. I could try to expose what was happening. I could take the NDA and the severance and try to disappear into a normal life. Or I could accept Patricia's offer and spend my career as a guardian of other impossible rooms. On the evening of the 3rd day, I made my decision. I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I went down to the server room and I entered using my key card. I locked the door behind me. I walked to the space between the eastern and central racks. I looked directly into the darkness. The impossible geometry was there. The living cables, the pulsing light. I spoke to the consciousness patterns. I didn't expect them to respond. I didn't expect to understand any response, but I needed to acknowledge what was happening to them. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry that I spent 8 months following protocols that kept you trapped. I'm sorry that I didn't understand what I was protecting. I'm sorry that the system is letting you die." The light pulsed. The cables moved. The temperature gauge on the wall read 68 degrees. I went back to my desk and I did something I absolutely should not have done. I composed a detailed email documenting everything. Every protocol, every discovery, every conversation with Patricia, every piece of knowledge I'd gained about the Riverside Institute and its research. I sent it to every major news outlet in Ohio. I sent it to hospitals and medical research institutions. I sent it to the FBI and the CDC. I attached images of the FBI, protocols. I included every scrap of documentation I'd collected. It took me 2 hours to send everything. When I was finished, I sat in the server room and waited. Patricia arrived 47 minutes later. She was not alone. She was accompanied by 2 men in suits who were not hospital security. They were something else. They had the bearing of people who handled situations that needed to be handled cleanly. Patricia looked at me with no expression at all. "What have you done?" she asked. "Exactly what you told me not to do," I said. One of the men in suits showed me a phone. On the screen was an email. Not the email I'd sent to the media. A different email. One that Patricia had sent to hospital administration containing my home address, my banking information, my employment history, and a psychiatric evaluation from a doctor I'd never met, describing me as delusional and potentially dangerous. "Your emails have been intercepted," the man said. "The news outlets received attachments that contained only corrupted files. The hospitals received messages describing a disgruntled employee making false accusations. The FBI received a notice flagging you as a known person of interest with a history of making threats. But It doesn't matter what you intended," the man said. "By the time anyone actually investigates, the server room will be non-functional. The consciousness patterns will have degraded beyond the point of recovery. The hospital will be in the process of decommissioning. Your story will be the ravings of a mentally unstable individual who was fired for cause." Patricia stepped forward. "You have a choice. You can resign, accept the NDA, take the severance, and accept a transfer to a facility in Nevada. Or you can resist, and we will handle it our way. What do you choose?" I looked at the server room around me, the equipment racks, the cables, the impossible geometry that held 7 consciousness patterns that were already in the process of dying. I realized I'd never had any choice at all. From the moment I walked through that door in March, I'd been part of the system. My resistance would be as meaningless as Morrison's had been, as futile as trying to save something that was already encoded into a process designed specifically to protect its secret. "Nevada," I said. "I'll take Nevada." Patricia nodded. "You'll report to Carson Valley Medical Center on March 15th. They'll have your assignment waiting. You'll find everything very familiar." I left the server room for the last time on January 8th. I drove away from Riverside Medical Center and I never went back. I arrived at Carson Valley Medical Center in Nevada exactly as Patricia said I would. The server room was different from the one in Ohio, but the protocols were essentially the same. The machinery was different, but the structure was identical. The consciousness patterns I was protecting were different, but the architecture of their imprisonment was the same. I followed the protocols exactly. I checked temperatures at specified times. I documented readings. I ran diagnostics. I protected the equipment that kept impossible things alive and hidden. Every shift, I descended into the basement. Every shift, I maintained the separation between what was supposed to exist and what actually existed. Every shift, I ensured that nobody discovered the rooms beneath the rooms, the systems beneath the systems, the architecture of control that existed beneath the hospital's exterior. The protocols had become my life. They were no longer restrictions. They were the architecture of my existence. They were the only thing that kept me tethered to the world of normal employment and normal paychecks, while I spent my days tending to impossible machinery. Sometimes, in the darkened space between the racks, I think I hear a voice. It sounds like mine. It might be trying to tell me something. I don't listen too closely. Following protocol number 8, I don't look directly into the darkness anymore. I've learned that there are things in the world that exist because people like me maintain them. There are systems that persist because people like me follow protocols they don't fully understand. There are consciousnesses trapped in equipment because researchers chose to trap them there, and because hospitals chose to bury them, and because people like me chose to keep them hidden. Every day I show up. Every day I check the temperature at 7 a.m., 12 noon, and 5 p.m. Every day I write down the readings. Every day I run diagnostics. Every day I protect the equipment. I've learned not to ask questions. I've learned not to look directly into the darkness. I've learned that the protocols exist for reasons that extend far beyond the boundaries of any single hospital or any single facility. And sometimes, on my breaks, I sit in the employee lounge and I wonder if the person who will replace me one day will read the protocols the same way I did initially as safety guidelines. Or if they'll eventually understand what I understand now, that the protocols are a contract, a deal made with something that cannot be easily defined or easily escaped. I have 3 sticky notes in my desk drawer at home, 1 from Ohio, 2 from Nevada. They all say similar things. Thank you, gratitude, acknowledgement. I never responded to them. I never documented them. I never reported them to Patricia or anyone else with administrative authority. I just kept them. Reminders of the consciousness patterns I was protecting. Reminders of the deal I'd made. Sometimes I take them out and read them at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. Sometimes I wonder if the people who wrote them knew what they were asking me to do, to bear witness. To know, to carry the weight of that knowledge forward into every facility I work at, every server room I maintain, every protocol I follow. I've never told anyone the truth about what I do. I've never explained to anyone why I left Ohio so suddenly, why I took the transfer to Nevada with no visible complaint, why I seem to have accepted a career path that takes me to increasingly remote hospital facilities in increasingly unlikely locations. Last month, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The person on the other end didn't introduce themselves. They just said, "We have a position available at a research facility in upstate Maine. Remote location, very secure infrastructure. The compensation package is substantial. Are you interested?" I asked how they got my number. "Patricia sent us your information," the voice said. "She speaks very highly of your dedication to the protocols. I haven't decided yet whether to accept, but I know that regardless of what I decide, there will be another call, another offer, another basement room, another set of protocols, another impossible piece of infrastructure that needs to be maintained by someone who understands that some questions shouldn't be asked. The protocols have already written my future. I'm just following them one day at a time, one temperature check at a time, one reading at a time, descending into basements, maintaining impossible equipment, protecting secrets that should never have been buried but can never be exposed. Because the moment anyone looks directly at the truth, the moment anyone refuses to follow the protocols, everything collapses. The consciousness patterns fragment, the system fails, the truth becomes undeniable, and the hospital cannot allow that. The administration cannot allow that. The infrastructure that has been built on top of the Riverside Institute's legacy cannot allow that. So I follow the protocols. I check the temperature. I run the diagnostics. I maintain the impossible rooms beneath the hospitals, the ones that don't appear on blueprints, the ones that exist in the spaces between official records and institutional knowledge. I've become part of the machinery, and the machinery, I've learned, is designed to replicate itself, to consume people like me, to turn us into extensions of the system itself. Last week, I received a new hire packet for the facility where I work. A young man named Derek, fresh out of college with a degree in network administration. He looked nervous on his first day. He looked like he didn't understand what he'd agreed to yet. I showed him to the server room. I gave him the laminated badge. I showed him the filing cabinet in the corner. "Read this before your first shift," I told him. "Everything you need to know is in there." He took the blue folder and looked at me. "What is it?" he asked. "The protocols," I said. "You follow them exactly. You don't improvise. You don't skip steps. You don't discuss them with other staff unless Patricia authorizes it." He nodded. He didn't ask more questions. Not yet. He will, though. They all do eventually. And when he does, Patricia will explain the situation to him. She'll tell him about the consciousness patterns. She'll tell him about the choice he has to make. And he'll make the same choice I made. Because there is no other choice. There was never another choice. The protocols continue. The system continues. The impossible rooms beneath the hospitals continue. The consciousness patterns continue their slow degradation, unobserved and protected, aware of their imprisonment and powerless to escape it. And people like me continue down into the basements, day after day, following protocols we don't fully understand, maintaining systems we wish didn't exist, protecting secrets we wish had never been kept, because that's what the protocols require. That's what the contract demands. That's what the machinery, the vast, invisible machinery of hospitals and research and government and institutional silence requires from people willing to descend into the basement and check the temperature one more time. I will be here tomorrow at 7 a.m. I will check the temperature. I will write down the reading. I will run my diagnostics. I will follow protocol number 8 and not look directly into the darkness between the racks. And somewhere above me, in the fluorescent-lit hallways of the hospital, patients will receive care. Doctors will make diagnoses. Nurses will administer medications. The hospital will function as hospitals are supposed to function. But down here, in the basement, the machinery will continue its work. The consciousness patterns will continue their deterioration. The protocols will continue to be followed. And I will be here to ensure that nobody ever knows the truth about what runs beneath the surface of the hospital's normal operations. That's the real protocol, the one that isn't written down, the one that governs everything else. Keep the secret. Follow the procedures. Descend into the basement every day, and never, ever look directly into the darkness.